Is your number one talk news and sports radio station where all the conversations happen. Nigeria Info FM. Welcome to Architects World. I am Gabriella. As you know, every Tuesday at this time, right after the news update at 2 p.m., we get to talk everything structure, everything buildings. And as always, I always have my guest join me on the show, architect Ebi Bozimo. He's right here, as he always will, in all his grandeur. Good afternoon,
Hi, Gabby.
architect Bozimo. Thank you for being
here.
Good
afternoon. It's great to be here. Nice to see you. You're looking
mutual.
Radiant.
Thank you very much, as always. So yeah, we're going to jump right into the conversation. Last week we had quite an interesting conversation. We had a lot of feedback, and I know that lots of people were looking forward to this conversation today. So let's jump right into the conversation for today.
Yes, today we're going to be talking about construction errors and consequences. And the reason is, I think one thing about something like the rainy season is that it very quickly exposes the errors you might have in a building or in construction, because rain is one implacable, let's call it ally, because water, of course, is absolutely essential, but just not essential in the wrong places on or around a building. So the rainy season has brought a lot of interesting things to light in much of our built environment. And some of those things are caused by errors during the process of construction. Now, what leads to such errors? Let's start from that. An error, first of all, could be defined as something which went on during the process of assembling a building or a project that leads to unexpected or undesirable conditions when that project is being utilized for one reason or the other. And what often might lead to those kind of errors could be, one, the wrong process being followed when a specific item of work is being done. You could also have people not adhering to the proper specification that was provided by any of the consultants, and that could and we'll talk about how you can avoid that. It could also be because somebody is trying to attain a goal that is appropriate for another entire context that is inappropriate for the context in which that particular project is situated. Like you see something in a nice movie or on a picture, and you desire it, which is perfectly fine, but you don't go through the pain and rigor of ensuring that it is properly adapted or customized for this area. What can happen is that you might initially get the visual result you want, but in performance, that might have some failures based on errors in construction. We always talk about the cost. The cost of construction is very high. You know, it of course can be approached in different ways to make sure that even if it's high, ultimately it is doable and affordable. But the cost of construction errors, therefore, is extremely expensive. And anytime you can get it right the first time, you're always ahead of the game.
So it's always very important to put that at the back of your mind, that in as much as I'm trying to cut costs, it might cost me more if eventually there is some error that I have to now repair.
Exactly. And the time that the most impact can be made in avoiding those future problems is at the design and detailing stage. So we'll start with one common construction error that creeps up around here, and one of our callers did talk about it when we were conversing last week. It has to do with water finding its way into the living spaces in a house in inappropriate places. The only places water should be in a house are in your sink, in your kitchen, in your bathtub, your shower, your toilet. It shouldn't be anywhere else. It should not be on your floor. It should not be dripping from your ceiling. It should not be found inside your walls or on the surfaces otherwise. Water has its proper place and nowhere else. But when errors are done in construction, and we'll discuss one here, then you find water showing up in some of the wrongest and most compromised places. One common one people are experiencing is water showing up in and on the wall surfaces, and in extreme cases, showing up on the floor, the ground floor level of a building. How may that have come about? In building science, which is part of what we're taught when we're all together in the first year of university, all the construction professionals have some variant of building materials and science education. So we're all well grounded on it. We know that water, even from secondary school, there's something called capillary action. Have you ever had a situation where there's a drop of water on a table and one edge of a piece of paper touches it? Before you know, that water will spread all through the paper without any breeze. That's called capillary action. Water is just, moving from one of the pores of the material to the other, and it's just moving along. Now, ordinarily, that is, of course, affected by gravity. Water never travels uphill, except it has the opportunity to touch another piece of material, and then you find it creeping up the wall. What happened? There is water to different degrees under the surface of the ground. We don't see it in most cases, but it exists. It's called groundwater. Depending on where your building is located, your foundation could be actually affected, actually sitting within the water. But that's not really a problem if you follow the proper procedure. And the proper procedure would be, of course, when you're casting the foundation, you have to dewater the place, create some barriers, pour your foundations. All that is well within the realm of structural engineers. They know how to deal with water. Then you come up out of the water. The first error is not getting the proper height above the general flood plain. So if somebody just says, look, I just want to come out of the ground and build a house, you might be successful in the dry season. But when the water table rises, when the area is suffused with water from rainfall, that water quickly comes up. It can actually, it can overtake the ground, because once the water becomes once the ground becomes full of water, it has nowhere to go, and it now starts coming to the top. If the ground floor level already is not high enough above the general floodplain, you will have water entering the house. But that's the obvious one. It happens in extreme rain conditions. The other one we're talking about, where water is creeping up the wall, is because water, having come from the foundation, up the foundation wall, now comes up maybe above the ground, and it has, if you put a barrier like a dam, you know how we build dams to make water stay in one place? You can have that dam on your river. We're familiar with it. But you also have another kind of barrier, a dam, on the horizontal flat level, which is supposed to be your damp-proof membrane. That water coming up is rising damp. You want to create a barrier so that when the water comes up the foundation wall, it hits that. The damp-proof membrane is really something that's like polythene, we know, but of course it's stronger, it's more suitable for construction. It's not just polythene, it's thicker, it's more robust, because it has to be dealing with strong construction, challenges and stresses. But when you do that ground floor slab, you're supposed to put a damp-proof membrane on top before you continue with your ground floor slab and your walls. What happens is that when water comes up, it hits that and it stops. It cannot penetrate. But many times people are just constructing, they're in a hurry, they are not getting the proper advice. There are details that are supposed to be included in the drawings that are not included. And why do I talk about the drawings? I talked about the best time to avoid errors is in that design stage. You see, when a properly trained professional does a set of drawings for you, all those considerations are incorporated into both the drawings themselves and into the specifications that accompany the drawings. If by any chance the contractor or whoever is building it for you doesn't include that, you have recourse, because you're able to point at the drawing and say, this was supposed to be there, it is missing. That means somehow the person building it is in breach. Now, any trained builder, especially in our area here, will do the right thing. And this goes back to why, another reason why construction errors happen: not using the proper team, the proper supervising consultants, the proper design consultants, the proper anything. It seems sometimes one of the ways to quote unquote save money. But what you do when you do that, you expose yourself to risk. So this water, if you added a simple thing like a damp-proof membrane, you would and made sure that the ground level of the building is high enough above the general terrain, then you will not have a situation where water can find its way through either up the walls or through the floor slab. I've seen houses where water is literally coming up through the floor slab. It's horrifying to see, but people are suffering it right now because of these increasing water rising levels. And it's a very hard one to fix after construction, which is why you cannot be too careful during construction to do the right thing. Another thing that could be an error, that is an error in fact, is not using proper materials in perhaps your electrical work. All wires could look the same. It's the proper electrical engineer that can distinguish not just between the look of the wire, but the proper size or gauge of the wire and how it's constructed, because all wires are not the same. They know exactly what is expected based on the loads your building is expected to, impose on the electrical system. Have you ever had that situation, maybe in university or secondary school, where somebody just plugged something into a socket and it flashed and immediately burnt, and that was it? That was an obvious overload. We've seen it, we've experienced it, but on a small extension level, we kind of correct ourselves. You get a new extension and you act differently. But imagine that happening in a whole house or on a particular circuit in a house. Another construction error. It meant that the proper type, size, and gauge, the specification of the wires was not installed during construction. And to an average person, you put on a light switch, everything looks okay. But the moment you attempt to impose certain loads on it, it'll flash. Now, a properly designed thing will also have the circuit breaker that can trip off in case of those kind of things. But you'll find that each time you try to use that, the circuit breaker trips off. Each time, that means there's an error. It's inconvenient to keep going to switch something on. When you're in your space, whether it's your office, your house, you should be able to do what you're focused on doing, not keep doing work at the electrical box. So somebody hasn't done the right thing. During construction, an error happened and it wasn't caught and corrected. And that's why somebody now starts living. What's the solution? Costly again. If you really want to do it right, you would have to pull all those wires out, purchase new wire, pay for the time, effort, and inconvenience of somebody coming to rewire the entire building. You can avoid that by doing it right the first time. And how do you try it the first time? Work with the proper professionals. They know what you need to do based on your expected building loads.
Now, I'd like to ask a quick question before we move on. Obviously, if you're listening right now, you have the chance to join the conversation. Whatever questions or thoughts you have, you can obviously join in and share. Now, how does a layman find the right team to work with, the right professionals? Because it's one thing, as Gabriella, to want to do the right thing. It's another thing to know how to do the right thing. So I'm interested in, building a residential.
For instance.
Yes, for example.
Absolutely.
Where do I start in finding the right professionals?
We are fortunate that in this era, with literally anybody with a smartphone, it is possible to contact the various professional institutes. We have the Nigerian Institute of Architects. They are available online. You have the Nigerian Society of Engineers. They're also available online. Typically, once you contact the architects, on your behalf, they can assemble a team of all the people you will need, understanding that An architect has his area of specialization that is not any of the other engineering areas. However, we all work in a team fashion to meet the needs of the client. So you, as Gabriella, when in need, referrals are one way. You could talk to somebody who has done it and ask them. And when you meet the person, there's always the opportunity. There is no professional who will be offended if you ask them about their background, their qualifications, whether they are licensed or certified or not. All this is because you are doing what? Your due diligence. You are a client who has a project. You have every reason to become comfortable with who you are working with and ask for their bona fides. Not anybody just come to you, maybe flash a few pretty pictures and say, I am a designer. What does that really mean? How are you a designer? By what means have you attained this role? And do your due diligence. Ask me. If you want to know, I must be able to provide for you my background, my education, my practice license, and all that. And you can cross-check. There's a register of architects licensed to practice in Nigeria, maintained by the Architects Registration Council of Nigeria. Something like that exists for the engineers as well. You are well within your right to insist on understanding who you are working with. And it's any of the professionals. All we are interested in is having the opportunity to present our skill at your disposal. But there'll be no professional who'll be offended by that kind of questioning. We need to be questioned. It also helps us keep on our toes.
All right, so the phone lines are now open. Today we're talking construction errors and consequences. Whatever questions or thoughts you have, you can share. The numbers to call are 0817 923 0002, 0817 923 0003. You can also call 0817 923 0007 or 0817 923 0009. On WhatsApp, it's 0809 0306416. We're also streaming live on Facebook, so you can watch us as you drop your comments on Facebook at Nigeria Info 92.3 PH. Now, you talked about some water errors earlier in the show, and from many of the things you mentioned, obviously the bulk of that responsibility lies with the team of professionals who, construct that building.
Right.
Is there any role whatsoever that a resident plays in contributing to some of the water errors specifically in a home?
Okay, that's the person who eventually uses it. Okay,
yes.
At that point, it would no longer be a construction error. It would be an in-use or running. It's like an error imposed by the person. If you don't properly dispose of things, if you create blockages in some of the drains or something, if you don't allow what was intended in design function as it ought, then you can have some breakdowns. But I don't think you would describe them then as construction errors, because presumably a construction error is baked into the structure while it is being put together. After that, it's now a user, and if the user isn't doing the right thing as would be expected, then of course you're going to have issues. You'll have issues with paint, common sense in terms of how you should use a structure.
Now, since we're talking also consequences,
Absolutely.
in a situation where you have, to the best of your ability, contracted the right professionals, and maybe somewhere along the line, when such a thing happens,
give people a sense of security? If you have worked with licensed professionals, they are licensed by somebody. There are various professional bodies. So one of the first steps, of course, if there's such an error, to address that challenge in, between yourselves using professional communication. Should that first step fail, you have further recourse to their professional body that licensed them. You can make a formal petition or complaint, and they will be summoned by their professional body to come and defend themselves against it. And trust me, first of all, no professional wants to have that happen. So the first step, first of all, is you're duty bound by the ethics of your profession to do your level best to make sure the person's project has no construction errors. That comes from the training, it comes from the experience. Before you become a licensed professional, you're supposed to have worked under the tutelage of some of our senior colleagues so that you see things, you can get any mistakes out of your system while you're still under supervision. So by the time you now become licensed, it is presumed, having passed assorted licensing exams, that you have the fundamentals of your professional practice under your belt. But we are all human, and mistakes do happen by architects and other people. So again, the first thing is, if after the building is now in use and some error is observed, the first investigating where it might have gone wrong. Was it indeed in the design and detailing stage? A possibility. Was it in the interpretation of that design in the construction stage? How did maybe the contractor get it wrong? Who was supervising that stage? How did they not catch it? Even if the contractor got it wrong, was there not somebody supervising them? If they were not, why not? These are all questions. At the end of the day, what's the sole goal? To get it right. There are features within a contract, perhaps, where you can call the contractor back to make the work good at their cost. And that's why a contractor is always trying to be very careful to get it right the first time as well. A contractor, when they're in doubt, they tend to write to the professionals, doing what they call a request for information. We're asking for clarification. We observe this. Is this exactly what you want? In fact, in certain installations, before the contractor does anything, you ask the contractor, give me first a set of shop drawings. Shop drawings are drawings where they are putting together exactly how they will compose what you intended. And then you as a professional are supposed to study those shop drawings, ensure that the intent of your design is being interpreted properly. Then they're supposed to go and make samples. The samples will be inspected, and it's only after the samples have been approved that they are now allowed to go and do full procurement. So these are the steps and stages when you are able to prevent construction errors from happening, or if they happen at all, from being multiplied during construction.
All right, let's get to the phone lines now. We'll
Yep.
take a very quick break. Good afternoon, you're welcome. Apologies, please call back. All right, we'll go on a very quick break, and when we return, the phone lines will be opened and you can join the conversation. Don't go away.
The rains are here. You know what? The rains have been here. Matter of fact, the rains are still gonna be here. But how about our shelter? How about our roads? Will they survive flooding if we continue dumping refuse in our drainages? Don't wait for the government to stop your neighbors from destroying our environment. Don't pour refuse into the gutters. Floods kill and render our neighbors homeless. Let's be our brother's keeper. Report offenders to the appropriate authorities. This message is from 92.3 Nigeria Info.
righty, welcome back. It is Architect's World, and today we're talking construction issues and consequences, rather. My guest so far has been architect Ebi Bozimo, and we've been having a great time here in the studio. So we'd like that you join the conversation. The phone lines are open: 0817 923 0002, 0817 923 0003. You can also call 0817 923 0007 or 0817 923 0009. Good afternoon, Samuel.
Good afternoon, my brother, my sister.
You're welcome. Go ahead.
I want to find out, is it possible that in a design error that causes defect on a project within the ability period, that's a retention period, that the client can sue the architect for damages according to joint contract tribunal? Thank you very much.
All right, Samuel, thank you for your question.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, during the defects liability, he's talking about what typically happens in a contract is that there's a scope, there's a time frame, and right after what you call the practical completion of the project, during the contract in the standard joint contract tribunal format he's talking about, you pay the contractor and withhold 5% of their money each time. It's called the retention sum. So at the end of the contract, you have that money. When they reach practical completion, you can give them 2.5%, but you withhold the rest. If there is a defect, that money is supposed to be used by the contractor. He's talking about during the defects liability period. You're supposed to use that money to take care of the defect. If it's so egregious, certainly it means that there was negligence on the part of the consultants or so. You have the right to sue, but typically there are structures within the contract that can allow you address defects.
All right. Ida is calling from Nkoro. Good afternoon, Ida.
Yeah, Gabby, I want to ask a question. Because this new modern house now, when they want to do electrical work, they always put it inside the block, then the wire inside the ceiling. What of in time of emergency? When the fire come out, you don't know the place. Because I know before when you want to wire house, you wire so that they will see everything. Because of you have any emergency, like and be able to go there and switch off something. But this one now you see smoke coming out, but you don't know how to trace the place. So I want to know what if fire accident happen in electrical wiring? How are we going to do about it? Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you so much for calling.
We want to take the next call and then we take them together.
All right. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You're welcome. Go ahead.
I'm Double calling from Wilmington.
You're welcome.
Welcome.
Okay. Good afternoon to your guests also.
Thank you.
Okay. My question goes like this. In executing a contract, what are executing a contract, what are the major factors to consider to avoid the errors?
Okay. We'll start with that. Typically, in a proper contract, there is a process by which you vet the main contractor and the subcontractors where necessary. And you also want to ensure that there is a quality management plan. You always want to also understand the procurement. What is being procured? How is it being procured? What are the warranties attached to the materials being installed? You see, a contract is a very interesting and relatively complex thing, but those who are involved have the understanding of what's involved. So there are different checks you do along the way. When you are doing concrete, you have tests you do at 7 days and 21 days. When you are checking electrical wiring, they check the thickness of the wire, the proper conductivity, even roofing sheets. If somebody quotes that a roofing sheet, maybe aluminum, is 0.75 mm, we get a micrometer gauge and measure it to make sure that what is written is what is delivered. You have all these steps you take. Again, no one is perfect. That includes consultants and everything, but you would have done all the steps you can to ensure that you are avoiding the errors. Then the materials are one thing themselves. The process of how they're incorporated into the building is very important. A very dramatic collapse happened in one building many years ago abroad. And what was found was that even though the proper gauge of steel had been used in the construction of the columns and slabs, the placement of the elements, the metal bars, was wrong, and it led to the columns punching through the slab, and that made the slabs collapse. So how what you are buying is one thing. The quality is the steel, the proper strength, dimension, and then how it's also built. Is it following the specifications? That is why you need the consultants to oversee your work to ensure that what is being done is adhering to the standards. Now, it has question about conduit wiring, as it's called. Yes, in the older days, you had surface wiring. But I would say one thing, even if there is a fire in a building, whether it's surface or conduit, please, safety first. Do not run towards a fire without being properly, without having the right thing. An electrical fire is going to be different from a kitchen fire. Don't go and throw water on electrical fire because it can lead to electrocution. The proper thing is to have a home evacuation plan or a building evacuation plan. Discuss it among the people in the house. In the event A happens, this is what we ought to do. Second, have handy fire extinguishers. Make sure that you have fire extinguishers that you can quickly use to maybe at least reduce the effect of the fire. But in all things, life, safety, and preservation first. It is better to lose all of your property and save your life than be attempting to fight a fire without the proper attire and equipment and lose your life. So that should just never be, set aside.
All right, so we're pressed for time already. We're going to be wrapping up soon, but let's take some comments on WhatsApp. This one here says, "Have been following your program on construction errors. What are the possible causes of a building wall crack?"
Settlement under the foundation depends on what level the building is on, but typically what could lead to building wall cracks would be settlement of the foundation, uneven settlement. But then there are also two types of cracks. There's a crack you see that really is about the cement sand render. That's the plaster. That may not worry too much. That could have been because maybe the mix of the cement to sand in the plaster was too high. There was too much cement, so it led to cracking. But when you have cracks that run through the wall and run through structural elements like columns and beams, then you must be very, very concerned, because those structural elements are what hold the weight and the mass of the building up. If those are not, if those are having compromises through cracks, you need a structural integrity test. You need a structural engineer to come and assess that building to see if it can be salvaged, if it's still safe, or if everybody should get out of there before it goes worse.
Another question here on WhatsApp says, "Good day, Gabby, and the guest in the studio. The new house we moved into, we found out that anytime it rains heavily, the walls and the tiles will start producing dew like water, which, if you're not careful, you may slip and fall. I want to ask the guest if there's anything we can do to avoid that happening again, for we have a careless landlord who is living far away."
You see, that's so unfortunate. And as I said, this rainy season exposes all these things. I bet they got the house in a beautiful, nice, dry weather. It's difficult without assessing the exact place to understand what can be done. So it would be foolhardy to just give a solution without knowing what happens. I would suggest they contact me or any other professional in our built industry to give them the ideas. But it really does depend. There are too many possibilities.
You'll be sharing your social media handles at the end of the show, so
sure.
anyone who wants to reach you obviously can.
Absolutely.
This one here says, "Good afternoon. Can you use 6 inches blocks throughout to construct a bungalow with a penthouse?"
A penthouse already means you have at least one level above. So that's what I'm suspecting. A bungalow would be all on one level. In that case, perhaps, of course, you could use 6 inches, 6 inches of 150 millimeter thick blocks. But once you have a penthouse, it means you are elevating a floor slab. You need a structural design to support the weight of that upper slab.
All right, let's see more comments, questions here. This one is from Kaiser. He says, if an architect does a design and was not consulted for supervision, if there is any defect, will he be blamed based on his design?
Again, if the architect does it, there are 3 stages. You can get the architect just to the design, and you may not use that same architect to supervise it. You can decide to do it DIY, but at that point, you are taking on the liabilities. When you use the professionals, they are the ones assuming the liability. So it's a choice a person can make. If you decide you want to take liability, all I will say is that it will be so much more difficult for you to reliably pin a problem on an architect who did not supervise it, or if the building was not supervised by professionals. It may not be the same architect, but whoever oversees the construction could be held liable. If you decide not to use any professionals, guess what? You are more likely to be liable.
All right. So I'm going to wrap up with this question because we have to wrap the conversation up right now. The mentality that a lot of Nigerians have when it comes to the quality of our buildings. So, for instance, the comments that came in about water coming up whenever it rains from underneath the ground. He also raised a couple of examples as well of that happening, the reasons why. You would find that some people say, when it has finished raining now, we're going to mop and everything is going to be okay. So that's attitude of just managing, so to speak, with the errors within our buildings and construction processes. What is the consequence of that in the long run, and how can we change people's orientation in that regard to take such somewhat seemingly minute issues but quite important problems more seriously?
I think the consequence was even said by one of our contributors. The risks of slips and falls is much higher. The hygienic nature of your project that has water coming in and out of it, you cannot be happy. It'll come with its own, let me call it, aroma. You'll have smells of water that just came in and went out randomly, like you and the water are sharing rent. Doesn't make sense. So it's not a thing to say, now, when you're already in there, maybe you say, I have little choice. I can't start moving now. But the consequence is, one, the inconvenience. It means you are now living like Ijo men. You're living on stilts inside your house. You have to have thick slippers. You make sure you raise all your items above the ground. Look, it's done. No one is saying people are not managing like that. But a conversation like this should lead us to ask for and expect better when we are seeking buildings, and especially those who are building. It doesn't cost more to make sure your building is done right the first time. When you think it's a cost getting consultants, you're actually investing in a better project for yourself, ultimately. And some of the projects we build we will build them, and in God's name, we will hand them off to our offspring. Isn't it better to hand off a project that is much higher quality to your offspring than one that has perennial problems? These are just questions. Everybody has their own different answer, but I would argue that the consequence is just a healthier life, less inconvenience, and a more wholesome interior. You don't want a situation where your paint is flaking off the walls, your floor is slick anytime it rains. If you are not in the house and it rains, you are wondering what you will find when you get back. That is a burden, a mental burden you just do not need.
All right, let's have your social media handles. There's a comment here that says, I have a situation with wall cracks. I don't really have enough understanding on constructions. I'd love for your speaker to drop his contact for follow-up and guidelines on what I should and shouldn't do. So let's have your social media handles for people to reach you on.
No problem. I can be reached at Ebi Bozimo on the normal handles, at Ebi Bozimo. My Facebook is a bit full now, but I can receive messages at Ebi Bozimo. I think it's Facebook, it's Instagram, and other ones that you people use.
But you're active on them, though.
I visit every so often.
Every now and then.
Every now and then. I'll try.
Right.
I'll always try to respond. That's for sure. And I appreciate feedback from anybody. Questions, comments, ideas. I love it.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Architect Bozimo. It's always an interesting conversation with you on the show.
It's always a pleasure.
Already looking forward to next Tuesday.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're
Have
welcome.
A wonderful day.
You too. So we get a wrap